Hey guys, I just wanted to talk you through what we did in Latin yesterday. So it's week 5 and we were covering lessons 9.3 and 9.4. So because we introduced verbs last week, I wanted to do a little warm up and just check their comprehension levels and if they were having trouble with their homework. So we used the game around the empire for me to test these concepts. I actually only used exercise 107 in class. Let me show it to you. So we talked about, first of all, I wanted to make sure that they understood what the directions were asking for. It says tell what forms these are. What that means is they're looking for like third person singular, first person plural, second person plural, that kind of a thing. So I would take one of these words, I would write it on the board and ask them to write the form, what form it was. So the answer I was looking for, again, like for example, this one right here, paramus, I was looking for first person plural because that's what the moose tells me. I wasn't looking for a translation. That's what it means by tell what form. Then once we went through about, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these verbs, and I noticed that, gosh, they're all getting them right. They clearly have gotten this part down. Then I went to number 2 right here where it asked for now it says here give 3 English translations. I did only ask them to write one of those down, but we talked through the fact that there were 3. Like for example here, orant, that is third person plural, so that could be they pray, they are praying, or they do pray. But I only asked them to write one of those down. So after I noticed, because I get to see everybody's whiteboard and what their answer is, I can tell at a glance that all 11 kids are getting it right. Or if there's only 1 or 2 missing them, then I can clarify with those particular students and we can move forward. And I will say I did have this chart right here with the first, second, third, singular and plural. I did have that on a giant post-it note on the wall so they could look up at that. And I want that in their faces all the time. I want it memorized. They have got to have a handle on this right here so that they can identify who is doing the verb. Anyway, so once we did that, it didn't take very long. I got just a pretty good perspective that everybody has a pretty good handle on that. So then we came over here and in my notes over here, this was kind of my lesson plan. I say read and ponder 9.3, page 105, which was really just this. We took turns, a couple of them read this. We made some observations. I let them have a little time to try to let that soak in and figure it out on their own, and then state this rule and have somebody try to paraphrase or tell me, what does that mean? Can you give me an example? So after we walk through that, we use these sentences right here. I think I had room for about 4 of them on the board, and I copied this on the board, and it looked like this. Now, again, what I have in black here is what I had on the board ready to go before class started, and then we labeled and worked on it with what I am showing here with the colored pen. Anyway, so the exercise is asking for them to find the correct ending. Well, in order to know what ending to use for the verb, they have to find the subject, which is the whole point of this, focus on subject-verb agreement. So there are 2 nouns to choose from, and so we talked about, what is it that we're looking for? Well, we need a nominative case ending because a nominative is where the subject is going to be. So it's real easy for these kids because they get in a pattern of recognizing, and this kind of reinforces it, that the subject typically comes first in a sentence, but it doesn't always. And so they need to learn to look for that nominative case ending. And so this guy has an accusative case ending, so clearly he is not the subject. He's a DO. So we labeled the sentences. We found our subject. We identified the fact that it was a third person plural, which meant I needed a third person plural ending over here. When we got to this sentence, somebody recognized that we had an adjective. And so one of the things I wanted to point out with adjective is I want them always to try to identify the noun that the adjective modifies. Sometimes you'll have a trickier sentence where that adjective might be between 2 nouns or something, and they need to be able to recognize that. Now, part of that will come with recognizing that both of these have an accusative case ending, whereas this is a nominative case ending. So clearly, the adjective is not modifying Caesar. We also talked about the fact that adjectives will tend to stand right next to their noun. We don't put an adjective somewhere else in the sentence, because then it becomes confusing as to what it's modifying. So same thing with Latin. They tend to be either right before or right after. We reviewed what we call the Walmart rule, which states that quantity comes before quality. So typically your adjectives that measure quantity will come before their nouns. Now, I don't know. I'm having a little bit of trouble with this one because in the text they have it, the textbook, they have it coming after. And in my opinion, first is a quantity adjective. I feel like it's been used as a quantity adjective in the past, but I could be wrong on that. But clearly it's coming after. So I guess those rules are not like hard and fast always, but we should be aware of them. Anyway, so moving on, we recognize we have third person singular of our subject over here. So we need our third person singular right here. We worked our way through each of the sentences, labeling them, identifying the subject and the verb, adjectives. I know this is something that I think is kind of important to point out. When you have a conjunction, especially a coordinating conjunction, if you remember on your essentials chart, it states that a coordinating conjunction will connect grammatically equal words, phrases, or clauses. And I want to point that out. That's really kind of an important concept, grammatically equal. Whenever you have an and, the two things it's connecting are going to be grammatically equal. So in this case, both of them are direct objects. This will come into play later down the road when we're making sure that they're writing sentences in parallel form, or they're recognizing that something is not parallel with something else, or I don't know, it just really comes into play in helping them understand sentence structure. So anyway, I wanted to take the time to point that out. Here is where we had to spend some time making our observations to identify which noun this adjective actually modified. Were we talking about a noble leader, or were we talking about a renowned city? So in that process, because these two endings are accusative, that meant we were DO, but this ending is a nominative singular ending. So that was like, oh, it must modify the subject. So anyway, that was, again, we're constantly reviewing the concepts. So it's important that they get this stuff. Anyway, so here's our subject and our verb. We had a third person singular, so we had our third person singular ending right there. Now at that point, I had said I was going to maybe play some bananagram hangman with some of the exercises that followed that, but the clock was kind of ticking pretty quickly, so we decided to just move on. We did not get to that. Instead, we went ahead and looked at our new vocabulary and made our observations. We talked about each of these words, what they mean. We identified that we had a couple of nouns. We took the time to figure out the fact, that we come here to see that it's third declension. We looked at the meaning, the fact that it means a centurion, that was a person, and it was probably a man person, and so therefore it was a masculine noun. And then we have, which goes against, if you think third declension and you come over here, a lot of the kids forget and they're like, well, the socks rule, and we're like, no, the fact that it's a man person trumps the socks rule. So this is a masculine noun. Now down here, numerous E, this genitive singular ending tells me second declension, and in second declension, our nominative singular is either ending with an us or an If it's us, it's masculine. If it's it is neuter. So we identified our gender there, and I want to point out in my book here, I actually made a goof. I hope they didn't highlight this wrong, but I was getting a little wild with my yellow marker here, and I highlighted that in yellow, and I realized that I didn't have another verb, and so I went over it with the blue. Well, clearly blue and yellow together make green, but this whole thing is supposed to be masculine. Anyway, so we read this. Okay, so there's our new vocabulary. We did take a look at some of the like the English derivatives, words that we get from these words. And so I like to look at these. These are kind of fun. And they'll try to come up with other words that they know. So we take turns reading. Here is our lesson 9.4, introducing the imperfect tense, which expresses action as going on in past time. So this is a great example here. This is I was eating dinner between 6 and 7 versus I ate dinner. Ate dinner just implies finished. which we're going to get to later in the year, but that would be your perfect tense. But here we have imperfect tense. In other words, it was not finished. It was spread out over time. So anyway, all of these are going to have that past tense helping verb, and then your verb will have the ing. And I'm pretty certain in English we call this past progressive. So as we continue to read through this, I just had the kids take turns. They read them. We talked about them. We made sure we understood them. And then we did this on the whiteboard. But I think I used a slightly different verb. What did I do? Here we go. Laudamos. So this is our stem. That what tells me praise. That's my first conjugation marker. The ba is a sign of the imperfect tense. And I forgot to mention that we did spend time in our grammar book before this. And I had them make observations. They have not highlighted this yet, but I had them make observations like the differences between Rule 163 and 162. And they very quickly identified the fact that down here, all of these guys have the ba, and all of these guys don't. The other thing that we paid attention to was the macrons, and the fact that in the A up here, the macron was in the middle in the first two, but down here, the A was across the board. Somebody else recognized that this A has actually a similar pattern to this A. The macron was in the middle and the first two. And I told them I've actually seen that pattern. Again, I'm no total master of all things Latin. All I really know a lot about is Challenge A level, but I have seen that this pattern shows up on a regular basis. Either the macron is on all of them, or the macron is in the middle on the top and the first two on the bottom. So anyway, that kind of shows up on a regular basis. You can look for it. But we did spend time looking at our chart here. Then, so they wrote this down in their exercise book. And then last but not least, we did spend time conjugating. So I had them find in their workbook this right here. We reviewed our principal parts and how we find those, the fact that it's o, ari, awi, atus, what the word means, and identifying that this, we actually have an intransitive verb here, so that's going to be different than a transitive. So we want to memorize those intransitive verbs and which ones are which. I do have them identifying what rule number. I want them to get good at that. And then we conjugated. I did not have them do this in class because we were running out of time, but we did at least this part. And I had it on the board as well, which I think you can see in the photograph of our whiteboard. But I did this, and then I just would point to one and ask a kid, what does this mean? Y'all fight, y'all are fighting, y'all do fight. And I would find the same exact, like, in the present tense, and then we would compare it to the same exact one down here. And the fact that this is present, y'all are fighting, down here, y'all were fighting. So we went through like all of these probably a couple of times, and I just bounced from kid to kid to kid, and we would say, okay, somebody tell me this. I am fighting. Down here, I was fighting. And we really compared the difference there and recognized that this is a present tense, and this is what we're going to call imperfect tense, but it implies a past tense action that was ongoing in the past. So we're going to have an ing verb and a past tense participle. So I think I wrote this on my board because I wanted us to compare, all right? The ways that the present tense, which for some reason I have on the bottom here, and the imperfect tense are different. This is kind of what appears to be the same word. It's the same personal pronoun marker, but this one has the ba, so that means we're imperfect. This one does not. Both of these are second person plural. The imperfect is going to have the past tense helping verb. This one's going to have the present tense. And if they're in the ing form, that implies the ongoing action. Now again, in English, we have 3 ways of doing the same one. Y'all fight, y'all are fighting, y'all do fight. But down here, we just have one. Y'all were fighting. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week doing your Latin homework, and we'll see you next week.